December. Is there concern that actually inflation might nip back in again when it comes to...
We really don't know at this point if Christmas was a blip or there's actually going to be some return to price rises. What I would say that come January, there's always a blizzard of activity from the supermarkets advising on price cuts because they know that consumers have a financial hangover from Christmas. So they are really wanting to help their customers and get them through the door. So we're going to have to wait and see later on this year if actually it's a slightly happier situation on the inflation point.
OK, Fraser, as always, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. That's Fraser McEvoy there from Cantor. Thank you. Now, let's bring you up to date with some of the rest of the business stories on this Tuesday morning. And house prices dropped by 0.2% on average in December, following 5 months of rises. As according to the Halifax, annually property increased by 3.3%, with the average house price rising to just over £297,000. McDonald's has dropped a number of diversity goals for its leadership and suppliers. The company had previously aimed to have women in 45% of global leadership roles and 35% of leaders to come from non-white groups by the end of 2025. McDonald's also said it will no longer ask suppliers to sign a diversity, equity and inclusion pledge. And Meta has appointed the chief executive of the Ultimate Fighting Championship and prominent Donald Trump supporter Dana White to its board of directors. The appointment follows the departure of the former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg last week as the social media giant seeks to build bridges with the incoming US administration. And you can get more on that and indeed the rest of the money and business news on our Money blog. Just scan the QR code on your screen now to access the Money blog on our app or indeed on the Sky News website. Now, Europe is set for a colder than usual January, which means that households across the continent could be forced to endure even higher gas prices. It's burning through its reserves faster than at any point in the last 7 years, and the closure of another pipeline from Russia means that supplies are unlikely to be replenished anytime soon. Let's dive into the detail now with our data and economics editor, Ed Conway, who's been looking at the changing map of energy.
Now, I realise gas prices, it's probably the last thing you want to talk about right now in the height of winter, but we do need to talk about what's going on in Russia, Ukraine with gas, because it's a big deal and it's going to affect us because we are all part of the same market. Even though we're not directly taking any Russian gas, what goes on here affects all of us. And if you just look at where gas typically comes from in Europe, some of it comes in on tankers, so LNG tankers, liquefied natural gas. Some of it's produced domestically, a lot of it in the North Sea, some of it in the UK. Some comes from Norway, so other pipelines, also from North Africa. But Russia, a lot of it historically has come from Russia. And if you just look at European gas, and this is a big deal because it goes into industry as well as going into our boilers, that red part there is Russian gas. And you're talking about 37% of European gas before the invasion of Ukraine. That's the rest of the stuff we're talking about, kind of domestic and Norwegian stuff. And if you look at the change, that's this year here. If you look at the change, that's down by 67%. So a massive fall, whereas the rest of the stuff has stayed more or less the same. But I want to show you this in particular, if we're going to zoom in on Russian pipeline gas, because that's also changing. It's changing. And when I talk about Russian pipeline, there's actually quite a few different pipelines that historically have been built coming into Europe. And it's worth just going through some of them because there's big stories and this is emerging as well. First of all, Yamal. This is a pipeline that goes through Belarus. That was sanctioned in 2022, so that's basically gone. We can kind of knock that off. Actually, flow stop in 2021. Nord Stream as well, as you probably saw, that was destroyed, or parts of it were destroyed in 2022, so that's gone as well. That was the biggest of all of the pipelines into Europe, which leaves the biggest remaining is the Ukraine pipelines. And that's where the news is. They have now stopped, OK? So this whole chunk here, it's actually already kind of lower than that. But historically, that's how big it was. That is also going to be gone. And that is going to be a concern for places like Slovakia, places like Austria as well, which are at the end of that pipeline. And we are now reliant, essentially, for pipeline gas from Russia just on this Turk stream, which is relatively small. And it means that Europe is going to have to dig further into its storage. Now, this is showing you the average amount of gas that we have on the continent stored. And let's compare it with where we are now. So this is 2024. And look, whereas we had quite a high level of gas, you can see it always goes down in the winter, we build it back up over the summer, that is now falling very fast, so that we're starting this year with the lowest level of storage that we've had in quite some time. Put all of that together, so the storage situation, what's going on with pipeline gas from Russia, and that helps explain why wholesale prices, which feed into the prices we all pay, are now up to the highest level since April 2023. Those are wholesale prices in the Netherlands. But some context here. Zoom out, and you can see that even though they're high, we are still a long way away from where it was at the peak of the energy crisis.
They go with Ed Conway with the latest on energy prices this winter. Now, the biggest annual event in the technology world is getting underway in Las Vegas. The Consumer Electronics Show is where the tech giants unveil the new gizmos, with artificial intelligence expected to dominate again this year. Well, let's speak to Ben Wood, Chief Analyst at the tech analyst firm CCS Insight. Ben, very good morning to you. And is it all about AI this year?
Absolutely. The show so far, which is only just kind of officially beginning today, but we had all of the press conferences yesterday, is just AI everywhere. References left, right, and centre. And the technology darling NVIDIA right now stealing all the headlines. They had a massive press conference, which my colleague who attended said was like going to a rock concert. 12,000 people in an arena listening to their CEO Jensen talking about the new products that they've got.
And when you talk about the new products, what are they, Ben? What are we talking about here that, you and I and everyone else watching this programme might see come on stream in the year or years ahead?
Well, Disneyland is, CES is like the Disneyland of gadgets. It's unbelievable. There's everything, all the kind of normal stuff you'd expect, like giant TVs, new laptop computers, new kind of home appliances, and all of those are the sorts of things that you would see. But also there's the weird and wonderful world of gadgets as well. So, some of the stranger things that are there are things like a new spoon, which electronically makes the salt a little bit more salt, the food tastes a little bit more salty, which is quite something. Even a walking table. But the important stuff is definitely things like improvements to PCs, making them more powerful, AI being layered across lots of different things like smart home products to make them more intuitive and more capable. And robotics is probably another trend that kind of your viewers will come across. All sorts of things happening there, from the vacuum cleaner that you'll have in your home right through to autonomous tractors from big companies like John Deere, who have a massive showcase there.
I love the idea of a walking table, I'm not going to lie, Ben. And I think we got a little bit of a peek there at this transparent kind of 3D TV.
Absolutely, yeah. The transparent TV was a theme that emerged last year, actually. And it's a kind of weird thing. I'm not quite sure why someone would want this, but apparently it's very, very good in like a retail location where you could be running a video in front of products. And I guess if you've got one of those amazing like Grand Designs homes where you could really have it as a feature as part of your amazing multi-million-pound home, it would be great. But I don't think many of us will be having that.
And this was a big year, or last year, I should say, for rings that you wear in your finger, tech rings. We saw them do quite well, didn't we? One of the things that's interesting to me is that VR, virtual reality, it's been around for a long time. It's had some big investors, not least of all Meta. And yet it doesn't seem to have been a breakthrough hit that it, I would suggest, potentially could be. Are we seeing VR play dominantly again this year?
So it's at the show, and there was some big news towards the end of last year where we saw Google announcing something called Android XR, which is an Android framework for headsets. We've got Apple, obviously very invested with the Vision Pro. Meta, as you say, have been very active in the space. But Apple and Meta don't go to CES, so you won't see anything from there. I think you might see something perhaps from Samsung, Google, and Qualcomm, who are working together. But I tend to agree with you, which a lot of the hype that was going around headsets has died down. And I think the whole category is looking at a bit of a reset right now. I certainly believe it will play an important role in our future, but it could be 5-10 years' time. And I hope that we'll get to a point where people who wear glasses like me will be able to have a world where the world around them is augmented, and I'll get a kind of head-up display with sorts of things coming through. I
was going to just ask that, Ben. I mean, I assume they're normal glasses, but isn't the next big thing that I've read about is kind of wearable tech, but particularly potentially those glasses?
Glasses, definitely. And we saw Meta demonstrating a concept product called Orion last year as well, which looks fantastic. And just imagine a world where we do get to a point that you don't have to have a big headset, which is very exclusive and you don't really know what's going on around you, to a pair of glasses which could have a pop-up that if you're looking at a landmark, it will tell you something about it, or you'll get information on, directions or those sorts of things. But I think the smartphone itself is here to stay. It's just you'll have gadgets that will augment your life in the same way that you talked about smart rings. This is a technology which I think is going to be so important. The intersection of health and technology is so critical for society as a whole as we look to do more preventative and predictive healthcare.
Anything, Ben, that means that you don't have to look at your phone when you're trying to work maps, I'm all in favour of. Just finally, for a man who's very keen on the future of technology, you're going to have to explain to me why you're surrounded by the most outdated mobile phones, including one that looks like it should be in a Dom Jolly show.
Well, I've been in the mobile phone industry for around 30 years, and as one of the things that I've got very involved in is safeguarding the future of old phones. So I have a charity called the Mobile Phone Museum. You can visit at mobilephonemuseum.com, and we've got about 3,000 old phones. So a real trip down memory lane for anyone who has some fond memories of their old phones.
Indeed, technology's been around for a long time when there's a museum open to it. Ben, thank you very much indeed. Ben Wynn there joining us. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, back to the present day and the markets. The FTSE down 0.28%. We'll have all the details after this quick break.
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry. It is an anti-woman agenda.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there.
Can you beat Donald Trump, Governor? President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Are you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way.
Free, wherever you get your news.
Excited.
I've had severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On-Board Lounge. better. Thank you.
OK, let's have a look at the markets in detail now. And Asia Pacific have done pretty well, actually, following an overnight rally in technology shares on Wall Street. It saw the S&P 500 post back-to-back gains. In Europe, the major indices have been pretty mixed up until the last couple of minutes, where actually they've all turned blue after Eurozone inflation rose to 2.4% in December, meeting expectations, hence why the markets seem pretty calm about it. Here in London, the FTSE, though, is down, thanks in part to Sainsbury's. As you can see, it's down 0.33% there. Despite the good retail figures when it comes to supermarkets there, so Sainsbury's not performing quite as well. Let's have a look at the currencies. Sterling is up both against the dollar and the euro this morning, and a barrel of Brent crudes. Oil it's gone up a bit again today. Actually, it's been rising over the last couple of weeks. It's now nearly $77 a barrel, up 0.85%. Well, let's speak to Patrick Farrell, Head of Research and Chief Investment Officer at Charles Stanley. Very good morning to you, Patrick. Let's start, if we can, with the idea of higher prices. We look at what some of the retailers are starting to say, and they're looking forward to 2025, and they're suggesting that it's not sustainable as it is.
Yeah, when we're looking at what avenues can some of these retailers, what levers can they pull, it's very, very difficult to sort of come through with some of the employment cost rises that we've seen as a result of the national insurance increase. And ultimately, they've got to be able to recover that somehow. So we are in a situation where those prices are going to have to go up in order to sort of pay for some of those additional costs that are coming through. But also from a UK perspective, you're very limited in terms of where you can actually get the stuff from. So from an importing perspective, it is going to sort of be something that they've got to be able to deal with at the same time. So because they don't necessarily control some of that manufacturing, they've really got to look at their end price sales. And as a result of that, prices are probably more likely to go up than go down. But they have to also be very sensitive to that, because demand might actually come off because consumers are a lot more sensitive to those higher prices.
Yeah, not least of all in an economy that seems frankly stagnant at the moment. House prices also under a bit of pressure, falling effectively as mortgage rates remain stubbornly high.
Well, I think the mortgage rate is the key thing here. You know, we've seen, and particularly when you think that people that were resetting their mortgages 2 years ago on that 2-year reset actually had to do it at a very high level. And as rates did start to come down, there was actually looking pretty attractive for them if they were going to reset around this time. But now, with market interest rates moving a lot higher, and the Bank of England being probably a little bit more reserved in their rate cutting expectations, you know, this is where we've started to see mortgage rates actually creep up again. And that is very sensitive to obviously a lot of mortgage holders, but also house prices in general.
And Patrick, you and I and other people have talked about the pressure London, the FTSE's been under in recent years, and that's also certainly true of the junior market. AIM, isn't it? Just not performing as well as many would have hoped.
Well, I think there is a small capitalisation. So for small companies on the London exchanges, it's been a very, very difficult time. You know, and we've seen some of the difficulties come through in terms of the economic activity. We just haven't had this stronger economy to really take these companies to the next level. And AIM is no exception. I think some of the stocks on AIM, very, very attractive companies with very strong balance sheets. But at the same time, the valuations that we're seeing on these companies is very low. So they do look attractive, but hence they're actually then takeover targets. And those companies that are growing actually need to sort of go to the main exchanges in order to actually attract more global investors, because that's the level that they're at.
Okay.
So, and I think some of the uncertainties coming through in relation to the budget, I think, are also a factor. but there are still really some good companies there, and with the business relief that's still available, I think that there are some good opportunities. Yeah.
OK, Patrick, as always, thank you for your time this morning. Patrick Farrell there. That's it from me for the moment on Business Live. Stay tuned, though. Gareth's up with the very latest on the severe weather next, and I'll see you soon. Good afternoon.